the before and after characters in the video tutorial. In the tutorial videos above, you can see me occupying at least 2 distinct characters. In part 1, I intended to present my habitual everyday self, removing any self-conscious attempt at performance in order to simply deliver an explanation of the method as myself. In part 2, I intended to once again return as this habitual character before self-estranging and transitioning into a different character. The aim was to produce a before and after effect which left the difference enacted open to observation by the viewer, by you, the reader. However, it was only upon rewatching the videos that I realized the before character I presented was nothing like my habitual character. If anything, it was as if I were exaggerating the display of normality, performing what I thought was my own normality, which necessarily made it abnormal in the sense of not my average way of presenting. This begins to stir the questions, what is the normal Katarina anyway? How do we know when she is being normal, not performing? And is there a difference? What is the nature of the relationship between the normal character and the other fictional ones? This video tutorial is just one of several instances in this research that reflects the ambiguity between character performance and the everyday presentation of self. Repeatedly encountering this ambiguity led me to discard notions of the real Katarina versus the fictional characters she plays as my research developed. From now on, I will refer to myself as an ecology of characters without privileging one type over another. I will assume that at any one time, in writing, researching, performing, speaking, or daydreaming, I am adopting some kind of character, where my habitual character or characters are merely the ones I present most of the time to most people. In Chapter 5, I will propose more precise terminology to distinguish between the classes of character that appeared in this research. Genre and character. Genre and context also come into play here because the manner that my before character displays is not arbitrary. Rather, it is stylistically recognizable as YouTube video tutorial narration. Simply by virtue of filming on a phone camera and uploading my works onto YouTube as a matter of course, the mode of address particular to vlogging regularly leaks into my performance works in general. Genre, very much like character, has a way of not only being used by us, the authors that wield the aesthetic tradition summoned by it, but also has a way of using us. Not only do we wear genre like a cloak that gives color to our authorship, but genre in turn takes us for a ride, puppeteers us, animates us with its habits, insinuates itself into us with the momentum of its historical usage. So does the genre of the YouTube video tutorial invest me with the materials that make up my before character. And so does the historical momentum of the PhD thesis as a genre invest my writing with an agenda of its own. Manipulating expressive equipment. In the tutorial, viewers are encouraged to begin the process of self-estrangement by changing a small superficial detail about themselves. The kinds of changes I suggest, such as to voice, posture, or appearance, fall into a category which Erving Goffman called expressive equipment, which includes the behaviors and attributes or sign vehicles used to manage an impression of the self in a social interaction. Expressive equipment could include setting, furniture, decor, background props, or other features external to the person making the impression, and personal front, items intimately identified with the impression maker, such as clothing, sex, race, posture, accent, etc. So by the way, by sign vehicles, he just means vehicles of meaning. So like even the shirt I'm wearing, the top I'm wearing right now, is a sign vehicle. It's a carrier of meaning. It tells you something about me, even though it seems like something so mundane and everyday. The top is a sort of carrier of signs that you can read, and what you read in that is also you reading me as a person or as a character. Goffman distinguished between relatively fixed sign vehicles, so sign vehicles or attributes, I suppose, that are not easy to change, like race, and more mobile ones, like facial expressions, or like what I just said, this top is easy to change. It's saying something, it's giving out meanings, but it's not that fixed. I could change my top pretty easily. So you have these fixed sign vehicles and then these more mobile sign vehicles. And it is these mobile aspects of expressive equipment that one is able to manipulate in artistic performance, whereby both setting and personal front can become the palette with which character is conjured and edited. So although some things about me are hard to change, like my physiognomy, is pretty fixed, there are some things that are easy about me to change. And the changes are pretty potent, actually, because they're things that you're going to read about me. So if I change them, you'll read something else about me. So what we're doing in the performance practice is manipulating mobile expressive equipment, things we can change. As Goffman realized, whether an honest performer wishes to convey the truth or whether a dishonest performer wishes to convey a falsehood, both must take care to enliven their performances with appropriate expressions, exclude from their performances expressions that might discredit the impression being fostered, and take care lest the audience impute unintended meanings. Because of these shared dramatic contingencies, we can profitably study performances that are quite false in order to learn about ones that are quite honest. So just to briefly unpack that a little bit, for those who aren't familiar with Goffman's language here, he was comparing the presentation of self in everyday life, how we act in everyday life, to a lot of different theatre analogies. So when he's saying performer here, he means somebody like me. Like I'm sitting here and I am trying to be myself. I'm trying to just be Katarina talking about my research here. And I'm trying to actually be honest. But even though I am trying to be authentic and I'm just trying to deliver this work to you, I could still be sort of as a performer, so I have tidied up the space behind me to make sure it's nice and tidy. I make sure that I'm like dressed and everything decent for presentation. I try to read clearly. So even though I have, let's say, honest intentions about what I'm doing here with you, I'm still in a way, in some sense, trying to control your impression of what I'm presenting to you. And that's in a way communication. I'm trying to get you to understand something. But to get you to understand something, I have to stage a sort of performance in a way. And what he's saying here that, like, let's say a dishonest performer would be somebody like a con artist. So if I was sitting here and I actually wanted to trick you into believing something, then I would still be concerned with controlling your impression of what I'm presenting to you. So Goffman's kind of saying here that regardless of the kind of intention of a person, whether those are honest or dishonest intentions, every person in a social interaction is kind of performing and using everything they have their clothing and the way they're holding themselves and the other expressive equipment like their surroundings to convey something. So that's what he means, that these shared dramatic contingencies mean that we can study any social interaction as a kind of performance between performers. So to continue, for Goffman, this meant that studying the dishonest performances of conmen or actors could yield insights into the same mechanisms active in the production of self. The shared dramatic contingencies of being and pretending mean that a performance practice is well poised for conducting experiments in the mechanics of self, where mobile expressive equipment becomes the variable. It becomes the thing we can change. If we imagine the performance art practice I'm presenting here as a kind of laboratory where we experiment with personality, then the thing we are toggling, the variable we're playing around with, is mobile expressive equipment, or the aspects of my self-presentation that are changeable. And so we're going to move on to a little bit of a deeper dive into this process of performing and how to understand this laboratory of practice that I'm presenting to you. Introspective performance experiment. To expand upon my present understanding of the mechanics of my performance practice, I initiated an introspective performance experiment. This experiment was designed to open up the processes involved in becoming other in the performance practice to more detailed observation, by focusing in particular on how I achieve a shift from one character to another. I recorded 7 performances in which I attempted to report aloud the decisions and the methods involved in shifting from one character to another, while simultaneously enacting that shift. A detailed description of the experiment and its results can be found in the second experimental report associated with this thesis, Introspective Performance Experiment, linked below. Here I will provide a brief summary of my findings. Through an analysis of the introspective performance recordings, I have been able to identify several recurring stages of the performances, or how I make the work that's presented in this thesis. So stage 1 involves an immediate shift in character produced by the knowledge of having entered a state of performance and the expectation of the rolling camera. This means that when I enter the state of performance, I've already become a different character to the one I was prior to the recording. Like a computer initializing a program, this initial character acts as a starting point from which I can load the rules of the performance before beginning to enact a shift into a second character, which will likely become the subject of the performance video. This initial character can be seen as analogous to the before character in the tutorial videos previously. Stage 2 involves shifting from the initial character into another character through a period of searching. The state of the environment and the state in which I find myself, my appearance, my mood, my energy levels, offer cues for beginning this character shift by triggering a chain of associations. These cues can be very subtle: the noise of a neighbour, the sense of not wanting to do a performance, the teacup in my hand. Stage 3 involves building up a palette of traits born of these associations and amalgamating various character influences until I land on a character whose voice and thoughts I am curious to hear. Stage 4 involves developing a narrative tangent from the perspective of the character. If a problem, paradox, or contradiction can be raised for the character to work through like a puzzle, this can help to sustain the improvisation and lead to a string of ideas that follow the logic of the problem to its end. This forms the shape of the story into that of a tangent. So by story, I mean the story I'm telling in the performances. I'm going off on a tangent in this character. The tangent only ends when I arrive at a mounting sense of exhaustion and a sense that I'm running out of options to explore in the puzzle. The pace of the tangent and the rhetorical devices employed to persuade both me and the audience of the import and logic of the unravelling tale appear to work together to resist the viewer's critical distance to the performance and encourage them into a state of receptivity. In this way, the viewer is encouraged to entertain the thought and inhabit the character along with the performer. The introspective performance experiment revealed the following key features of the practice, observed throughout all of the 4 stages. Mood. Performances had the propensity to profoundly change my mood. Mood revealed itself to be similar to character to the extent that it acts as a mind frame, while temperament might describe what mood is when it becomes a character trait. Mood, temperament, atmosphere, genre, register, and tone all relate to the way in which something is, placing them in close relationship with character. Exhaustion. It is exhausting to sustain character inhabitation. The effort employed in performing the character at first seems to contradict my claim to authenticity in the act of inhabiting them, because there's an assumed correlation between effortless self-presentation and authenticity. However, just as introverts spend comparably more energy on sustaining social interaction, while still being able to present themselves authentically, and just as learners of a new language must employ greater effort to communicate without being disingenuous, this correlation does not always hold. Thought shift. In each performance video, I was able to have thoughts that have never occurred to me before. This suggests that inhabiting a new character has a way of shifting my perspective and opening me up to new narrative and aesthetic possibilities. As a creative device, character can lead me out of familiar aesthetic spaces and make it more likely for me to stumble upon novelty. Character versus narrative. In my performances, you'll see that I'm kind of juggling both at the same time. I'm sustaining this alternative character that I'm inhabiting, and I'm also kind of spinning a narrative web. I'm telling a tale. So this point is about the tension between sustaining these 2 things. So character versus narrative. During the introspective performances, I found my attention was split between the task of inhabiting a character and the task of coming up with a story to tell from the perspective of that character. There was a certain trade-off between characterization and storytelling, where the focus on the latter seemed to impact my ability to focus on the former. As a performer, this dilemma was resolved by privileging characterization. By focusing on committing myself to becoming possessed by character, I maintained an experimental element to the performance, through which the story I told could emerge from that character's perspective without interference from my habitual character's judgment on what constitutes a good story. Conversely, when rewatching my own performances as a viewer, I found my priorities inverted. The value of the performances did not ultimately lie in the performer's ability to present a convincing character, but in the stories and ideas that emerged from that character. All of these points will be developed on a little bit later on, but these are the initial observations I made when looking back at myself performing. But this final point is a little bit nuanced. It's trying to say that there is this kind of attention trade-off as I'm performing. If I think more about inhabiting a character, I can lose the thread of my narrative. And if I'm focusing more on where the thread of my narrative is going, I could sometimes lose my character. So as asking myself, which one of these should I privilege as a performer? and I settled on privileging inhabiting a character and letting go of control on the story, based on the theory that if I faithfully follow a character's perspective, that the story, whatever it is, will come, and that it's precisely the surprise in what will come as a result of inhabiting this character, which is what makes the videos interesting to me. So if I control the narrative, I'm doing it from my kind of executive character, my habitual character, and controlling the outcome of the narrative. But actually what I'm more interested in is how a shift in character can affect the narratives I can come up with, not coming up with different narratives and then trying to fit a character to that narrative. So while as a performer I might focus more on character, just being somebody, as an audience member, when I'm a viewer of my own work, what I'm more interested in is not how accurately I seem to be presenting as somebody else, but what is being said. I'm more interested in the story. So as a performer, I'm more interested in being the character, and as a viewer, I'm more interested in the resulting narrative. Another thing to point out as an observation has to do with error in the performances. So certain errors, such as inconsistency in characterization, right, where I would accidentally slip in and out of different accents in the same character. So that was one form of inconsistency, characterization. There was also mispronunciation or accidental misuses of words. These sorts of errors do not necessarily undermine a performance. Rather, their transparency serves as a way for a viewer to trace the path the performer takes when her mind is shifting frame. However, this is not to romanticize errors and say that there are none that could undermine a performance. And in chapter 4, I'll give you an example of a video that I thought failed, a performance that I thought failed. And I'll talk to you about what I think made it go wrong. However, little things like a slip of a tongue, saying the wrong word, oscillations in characterization, I found that they are not actually affecting the quality of the performance necessarily. These observations about the performance practice will continually inform the theory of character proposed in this thesis, as well as the positioning of art practice in relation to the study of self-mechanics. While this section described the performance practice as a process, the next section will look at where the characters in the practice come from in the first place, and how character operates as a system of memes.